Hi, I didn't plan this video at all. So what I want to do today is kind of have a discussion video through the means of a book I read semi-recently. I read it maybe, 2 months ago. I kind of want to talk about torture porn. Most books that people enjoy have some sort of forward momentum to them, something pushing you. And a lot of the time, those things are maybe something a little tragic or sad that happens to your characters, though not necessarily, but just for sake of simplicity of this conversation, we're just going to be talking about those books that, have something depressing happening in them, have something sad or traumatic go on. I wouldn't constitute a lot of those as torture porn. Sad things happen in life, but there becomes a point, I think, where a book can be too gratuitous and a little too consuming in that. And I think some people like that, but it's so off-putting to me. And the book I want to have this conversation through about is The Great Alone by Kristin Hannah. This was my first Kristin Hannah book I read. I know everyone was into The Nightingale a few years ago, and people were talking about how much the book made them cry. And we kind of sometimes rate or determine the goodness of or the impact of a book by if it brings tears to people's eyes. And I've done that before. There's some books that really move me, and if you can get me to be moved emotionally, you are doing something. Let's break down the plot. And I'm going to try to do this without spoilers, because I will say, this is a compulsive read. I can see why people love this. I stayed up late reading it because I wanted to find out what happened. I wanted to find out what happened because I'm like, oh my god, another, this chick has to have a happy ending. Please give her a happy ending because of all this bad stuff that keeps happening to her. So, this is historic fiction. It takes place in the 70s in Alaska. Her dad is a former prisoner of war in the Vietnam War, and he comes back a different man. She's 12 or something when he comes back, maybe a little bit younger, and he's never the same. They inherit a property from one of his other friends in the war in Alaska, so they decide to go up there. The Alaska scenes, loved them. I loved the scenery. I loved seeing Alaska. I thought she did a really good job of presenting Alaska, which was why I was interested in reading this book. But then bad things start to happen. Of course, going up to Alaska isn't going to solve her dad's PTSD. He's abusive to her mother. It becomes a claustrophobic situation because they live in an isolated area and they live in an isolated home. There is a lot of abuse, domestic abuse, on the pages of this book. For people who have been in domestic violence situations, I wouldn't read this. I think this would be a fairly triggering book. Her dad, his PTSD gets worse, especially during this winter where you have no sunlight. Even for people in better mental health conditions, this could be a very difficult situation to be in. Every turn this book takes, something bad happens. You think she's going to get this happy ending, but of course the dad is against it. You think that the dad might learn a lesson, but again, he doesn't. I almost felt like she wanted this book to be so torturous that people were almost constrained by their characters were constrained by these narrative choices, and they didn't have autonomy, which sounds silly because, books, the characters don't have autonomy, but they felt very rigid. You go into this book knowing the father is not going to change. You have a feeling it's going to get worse, and it does. I was intrigued to keep reading this book. There was this compulsion to read it, but I wasn't enjoying it because it was torturous. There was just horrible things happening on the page of this to your main character, and it eventually got to the point where I'm like, good God, is anything going to go right for her? I guess I won't say if it does, but one thing happens, then someone dies, and then another thing happens, and then another person dies, and then something happens, and then someone's seriously injured. And then, meanwhile, her mom's getting, pushed around mentally, physically, verbally, literally all the ways you could think of by the father. So where is the line of it being too gratuitous? I've read a lot of books that have traumatic things happening or torturous things happening on the page, but it doesn't feel gratuitous. It feels like it makes sense with the narrative. But in this case, it fell on the opposite side of a line. And I was looking through the negative reviews on Goodreads, and a lot of people feel that this book fell on the opposite side of the line. Something just being sad and something trying to like play with your emotions and trying to come up with the worst situation possible and just being all around torturous. I don't know. I don't think I have an answer. I don't think I know really if I have a complete point. I don't think I like this. I do think I want to stay away from narratives like this. I would consider myself someone who doesn't really have many triggers in books. Not a lot of things get to me, but this did. Not in a way where I was triggered, but in a way where I found it utterly exhausting to consume, and then afterwards it kind of left me feeling like I couldn't read anything negative. I kind of needed some sort of pick-me-up after. So I guess, what are people's lines? What do you define as torture porn or just a sad narrative? Do you feel like there's a line? Does it have to be numerous things happening over and over again? Does the violence have to have a point in the narrative? Does it have to have some sort of closure? Does it have to feel constructive to you? I guess that's all I have for this video. I feel like I don't know if I articulated my point very well. Maybe in editing, I'll think of something to add in. But I keep thinking about this book, even though I read it a few months ago, and I've kept wanting to talk about it on my channel. I just haven't really known how to incorporate it. So that's all I got for this video. So until next time, happy reading.